Good morning, St. Augustine. Your access to the voices of top local newsmakers starts now. Here's your host, Liz Ryan.
Good morning, and thank you for tuning in. St. Johns County has a very deep and impactful Black history. This morning, we're going to be discussing the Black History Trail, and I have three very fascinating guests with me. Good morning, Thomas Jackson. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning.
So tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, I am a lifelong resident of St. Augustine. I've been here, born here on the San Sebastian River in the Florida East Coast Hospital. And I've been here ever since. I went off to school in Tallahassee, Florida for a period of time, but then I came back, and I've been here ever since. And I've been sort of, history has been kind of a hobby for me, but I've enjoyed every minute of it.
Thank you for being here. Brenda Swan, good morning. Tell us a little bit about your background.
Hello, and good morning. I work for the St. Johns County Cultural Council as the Director of Grants and Operations, and I'm a native Floridian. I've lived in St. Augustine just a little over 14 years, but it was probably the first 8 or 9 years I never even knew about some of this history that's here, particularly the civil rights story. And so I'm excited that we're able to share it the way we are now.
Thanks for being here, Brenda. Good morning, Regina Gale.
Good morning. I am happy to be here with you today. And I am the Executive Director for the Lincolnville Museum and Cultural Center in the Lincolnville Historic District of downtown St. Augustine, where we cover more than 450 years of Black history here in the county. And I am a native Floridian, although I've only been in St. Johns County off and on since 1998. I've learned a lot of the history by being affiliated with the Lincolnville Museum that growing up we just didn't hear about because it wasn't being shared very widely. So happy to be a part of this project where we're able to share the heritage of this community, of this county, out in a way that makes it front and center to what we do in terms of attracting people to come and visit us in St. Johns County and explore all the different areas, the diversity of the Black history that's here.
I'm so glad that Black history here in St. Johns County is being told to an extent that actually does it justice. And I also want to give props to Beth Strauss, who's over there in the corner being so quiet, from the St. Johns County Cultural Council. Good morning, Beth.
Good morning.
Thank you for facilitating this. Okay, there's so much to dig into. It's going to be hard to cover it all in 30 minutes. But Brenda, if you could please tell us how the Black History Trail came about. And that was a huge undertaking, right?
Yes, there are definitely times over the last year it certainly felt pretty huge. About 5 years ago, there was a bit of a change of leadership at the Cultural Council, and the executive director at the time, Christina Parrish Stone, was learning about the community. She learned about these stories with the Black heritage, from Fort Mose to the civil rights demonstrations and the founding of Lincolnville, and learned about the organizations that were telling them, and wanted to work to tell these stories more, get them more out there. And then I came on board, and my background is grant writing and as well as history and archaeology. I didn't really know about them till shortly before I started working here, so I was all on board with that. So we started off by first working with the organizations to learn more. We put an exhibit in at the St. Augustine Beach Hotel that tells the stories of the wade-ins that occurred there to desegregate the beaches. And that was sort of getting our feet wet, no pun intended, and starting to tell this story and share the story and get it out there. Then when we wrote grants to the National Trust for Historic Preservation, the Florida Division of Historical Resources, and then also through a contract we have with the county to promote St. Johns County as a place to come and visit and do fun things. We kind of combined that funding and then gathered the people we had been working with to learn about these stories, to share what they were doing in the community, and through our contract with the county to promote those activities, work with them, bring them together, and hear from them about what they wanted to share with their community and with the wider nation and world about their stories and heritage and history here. And so from that, we put together the project and what the trail is, what the sites needed to be, and these are sites that you can go visit, and also some of those lesser-known stories, even lesser-known than the bigger stories, quote-unquote, Certainly Fort Mose is a great story, and I'm sure Thomas will definitely share more about that, as well as our civil rights history with the demonstrations here, learning that Martin Luther King was here. I didn't know that. It took me a few years, almost a decade living here before I ever knew that. So anyway, we put that all together and worked with them. They helped keep me straight. Regina Gale and Thomas helped keep us straight in terms of we had a team from Quatrefoil Associates to help design the guide, the printed guide. We also have a website that people can go and learn more and see the sites. And then we put signs up at 5 county parks to share more of their Black heritage. So that's kind of the gist of the trail and the project and kind of where it got started and how we move forward with it.
Brenda, I hope that we're going to be really successful today in selling the trail to really market it to locals, because this is something that everybody here in St. Johns County, I think, should experience, not just people who are out-of-towners, visitors who do cultural and history vacations and tours and travel, but it's something I think everybody should see. So we're going to explain today, I hope, we're going to get the message across today that this is actually a really fun thing to do, is to hit all the spots on the trail, right?
Yes, definitely. And it's something as a community member to be super proud of and want to share widely as well. So I totally agree with that.
How many stops are there on the trail? It's not actually a trail that you can walk from one place to another. It's spots all around St. Johns County, right?
Correct. There's 20 locations, and they're in the west part of the county, northwest county, near Ponte Vedra, of course, St. Augustine area, at the beaches. So it's pretty much all over the county, and you can pick a weekend to go to one of those locations and have a lunch or dinner and visit the site or sites. So it's definitely something, if you haven't known about this, definitely locally pick that up, and then you can also help share the story with your friends and family here and wherever they might be. So
maybe a family could make a 20-week goal to hit one stop on the trail
I love that.
a week for 20 weeks. Mr. Jackson, let me ask you, what do you think are a couple of the most important and impactful spots along the trail?
Well, of course, I think all of them are impactful. I do know we narrowed it down to 20, but I think there's probably twice that many that we could include in the Black Heritage Trail Part 2. But I think when we talk about the highlights of black history in the area, we look at the black militia that fought to save St. Augustine back in 1763 and 1740. Also in 1812, those battles that were fought by the militia against the enemy that was trying to capture St. Augustine. You also, and you can fast forward to a lot of the history of Lincolnville, how Lincolnville was established right after the Civil War. And, that's a big part of the history of the black community. And then, of course, the role that Lincolnville played in the civil rights period, moving forward into the 1960s. So if you want to look at 3 eras, I guess, that I think is important, you want to make sure is about the Fort Mose story, the Lincolnville story, and the civil rights period. Now, of course, there's black history that goes even beyond and also coming forward, so it's all intertwined in that time period. But those are the 3, I think, that has more of a state and national significance.
Now, back to the point that we want to really get across, that this trail is engaging and interactive, and it's not just looking at pictures and reading plaques. Set the scene for us, if you would. What is a trip to Fort Mose like?
Well, when you go to Fort Mose, it depends on the time period you go. You can go on the first Saturday of each month between 9 and 11, and you'll see a reenactment by the Mose militia. And, of course, in February, we have Flight to Freedom, where there's a reenactment that tells you the story. And then, of course, in June, we have the Bloody Battle, which is the reenactment of the 1740 battle that was fought here, at the Fort Mose site. But what you really would come away with, what we would like for you to come away with, is the fact that the freedom seekers coming down from the Carolinas, they made their way here to Spanish Florida. If they became Catholic and agreed to join the militia and defend the city, they could live free at the Fort Mose site. And that was just about about 5 miles north of St. Augustine. So the only way that any enemy could get to St. Augustine by land was by way of Fort Mose. And, of course, the community at Fort Mose was a militia. It was a fort, but it was also a black community. And most of the time they were living like most communities, but they were living free as opposed to how they were in the Carolinas.
Mm-hmm. So I think
Let's
maybe
have
the
the
northern part of the country is considered to be progressive, yet down here in the South, we have the first legally sanctioned free black settlement in the U.S. That's really something to be proud of.
Yes,
Absolutely.
yes. Well, you say the first legally sanctioned free black settlement in what is now the United States, but was at that time Spanish Florida. So it was a different societal makeup. In other words, the freedom seekers from the Carolinas out of British territory was coming into Spanish Florida, which is Spanish territory, which was a different societal makeup.
And I think something fascinating is you think of the Underground Railroad as going north,
Yes.
but it actually first went south.
Correct, into Spanish Florida.
Tell us about the Underground Railroad a little more.
I'm not a historian, I guess you would say. I'm not a trained historian, but I'm a kind of a hobby of mine. And I've learned that when the freedom seekers would come from the Carolinas down into Spanish Florida, they were assisted by the Native Americans, mainly the Yamasee. And the Yamasee would assist them in getting to Spanish Florida. And if you think about why would the Yamasee need to help them? Well, there was no I-95 or US 1, and of course everything was all grown up pretty much. So, and you had to navigate by way of the intercoastal or through thickets. It was probably different animals that you had to avoid. But then also when you get to the St. Mary's or the St. Johns River, there was only certain places you can cross. And I think there was one place in the St. Johns River where the Native Americans used to take their cattle across. So that was the place in the St. Johns River where you could cross as a person. So if you didn't get into that area of the river and cross over into Florida, well, then you pretty much would get washed out to sea. So the Native Americans were a big help in getting the freedom seekers that were coming down, by way of the land, getting into Spanish Florida, and then by way of the intercoastal with the boatmen helping them get down by way of the sea.
Interesting. You're listening to Good Morning St. Augustine. I'm your host, Liz Ryan, talking all about the Black History Trail. Regina Gale, let me ask you about this. I remember when this was a little bit of a touchy subject. I remember at one point growing up, I was told, don't say black, say African American. So why is this the Black History Trail and not the African American History Trail?
I think it's a matter of trying to find a way that people identify. So African American became a thing, I think, in the late 70s. Black was a thing in the early 70s during the Revolution time, say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud, James Brown. But I think that it has to go beyond complexion to the makeup of who we are as people. And so I think that people are comfortable going, changing in and out of it. But I think for the purpose of this project that we had to settle on, what are we going to call it? Are we going to call it the African American Trail, or are we going to call it the Black Trail? And I know when we were on serving on the Black History Museum Task Force, that one of the explanations that came forth was that we wanted it to be inclusive of people from the Caribbean and other, island nations that still had those African roots, even though they may have been in some stage of denial about their African identity because, over time that, they were like, I'm not from Africa, or I'm from here or there, but they still had, black as a part of their identity. And America has, as a country, has separated people based on complexion more so than where they came from. Because if you came from Haiti, we may call you Haitian American, but for the purpose of what we're doing, we want to say we're all a part of the black heritage of this country. Mm-hmm. So even as we go back to Jorge Biasul, who was of Haitian descent, he's still considered as a black, leader that came here to St. Augustine. And as we do the history of St. Johns County, we want to be inclusive of all those people that were a part of it, because even the earlier conquistadors, they would not necessarily be identified as African. Some of them were Moors who had come from Africa, northern Africa, into Spain or into France, that came with some of those early explorers. And they're a part of this history as well.
Regina, what do you think that the Black History Trail offers to people today, visitors and residents alike?
I think it's a comprehensive guide of where you can find information about the heritage of black people in this county and in this country, because it's not just a St. Augustine, St. Johns County Heritage Trail. Our history really has implication, a part of the national narrative of black history in this country, the oldest black history, oldest free black settlement, Fort Mose, the oldest known explorer, Juan Garridos, who was a conquistador who came in 1513. So all of those stories are a part of the American narrative. So when people get it, they say, wow, this is really awesome. And even though it's not a history book per se, we try to make it, and I thank Brenda for that, keeping as much of history in there as opposed to just being a tourist attraction, that they could find out about the educational institutions, the industries that were here, the churches that were here, and some of the people that made this community what it is today. So I just see it as a comprehensive guide to, if you want to learn a little bit about why do we have a Gullah Geechee festival in the Sikh community of Armstrong, and what made that community significant? What do we do? Why do we have Alpine Grove in there as a part of a Black history, Black Heritage Trail, so we can learn about some of the people that were part of the northwest part of the county, and all those stories that we've mentioned already. That wherever you are, whether you're visiting relatives in different parts of the county or you came for another event in the county, you can find something close by that you can connect to Black history in this community.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. If somebody has going to all the 20 sites on the Black History Trail on their to-do list, but it's going to take a little time to get to all the 20 spots, can they just kind of see it all encapsulated at the Lincolnville Museum?
You can see most of it there. I think you'll see parts of stories of all of it there, and some in more detail than others, because what we have done with the Lincolnville Museum is create that hub of history, but you got to come into the museum in order to see it, where you can go from the early conquistadors, as I mentioned, through the civil rights movement. We have stories about Fort Mose, the people who were involved in the Civil War through the civil rights, Reconstruction era. All those different periods of history are included in our exhibits at the Lincolnville Museum.
And I think Black history and all history is still evolving. And something we're seeing, I think, in real time is the evolution of West Augustine, which has a large Black population. Who wants to speak to that?
Well, I guess I can say a little bit about West Augustine, since I was raised in West Augustine. But, I always like to say, when I used to open up my meetings with the St. Augustine Historical Society, I was the president of that, the immediate past president, that, when we talk about the history of St. Augustine and St. Johns County, when something was going on downtown, something was going on uptown, and something was also going on overtown, and also something was happening on the west side. So when you want to get a complete history of everything, the total picture, you need to take into account all of those activities that were going on in order to get a clear picture. But when you talk about the West St. Augustine, it's probably, it's changing. It's changing quite a bit. But at the time, when you talk about St. Augustine's 450-plus years, West Augustine was kind of like the Wild Wild West. It was outskirts of town. And when you cross the San Sebastian River going west, well, there was not much there. There was some grape orchards, there were pecan orchards, there were A lot of orange groves, but they were mainly on the island. But there was a community that lived out in the area, and if you go further west and then go north, you got the Piccolata community out there, where there was a community that kind of looked out for themselves, and there was a lot of folks. Like I know one guy Mr. Van Dyke, who was he may have been related to the Van Dyke. That was I know Regina might know a little bit more about this. He was a alderman or a government official, one of the first black government officials. But he was active in the community, equestrian community. He used to take care of horses. He may have been a relative of the Mr. Van Dyke, who was a government guy. But anyway, the community now in West Augustine, it's changing quite a bit, and people are moving into West Augustine. It used to be predominantly a black community during the 50s, 60s, and of course, early 20th century, the Florida Normal and Industrial Memorial College, they moved out in the West Augustine area. And there's a marker there that you can read a little bit about that story. And I actually learned how to swim at the Florida Normal pool that was there, because basically there was only two places you could swim in West Augustine, and I was in the Florida Normal pool or in the burrow pits. And a lot of times we lost kids every year in the burrow pits, so my folks told me it was better if I learned how to swim in the pool. Now, the pool was mainly a college pool, so it was for the college kids. But since my dad taught there, I was able to use the pool. So I grew up in West Augustine, and of course I went to school in Lincolnville. I went to St. Benedict de Moore School, which was established by the Sisters of St. Joseph, and it was actually established in 1898. But the Sisters of St. Joseph, who were brought here by Bishop Verreau to teach the newly freed blacks how to read and write, they established St. Benedict. Well, it was St. Cecilia's at first, but then it became St. Benedict de Moore School later. And that school was under extreme deterioration. We kind of worked on it to restore it, and now it's been restored as a resource for the community to help unwed mothers advance in the world of work. So it's a lot going on in, I'll put it like this, the Lincolnville community and the West Augustine community is intricately tied to each other. So you need to learn about one, learn about the other.
And I think they've always been that way, because West Augustine or New Augustine is really not that much older than Lincolnville when you look at it historically. And a lot of those people, as Thomas said, that the children on the west side, they got bused to the Excelsior School. And then when Murray came online, which was the second black high school, the kids in Lincolnville, they closed that high school and they got bused to the west side. And a lot of the families who had lived in Lincolnville, where a lot of like Accord has its Freedom Trail markers, some of those families ended up moving to these new communities in the west side, which to a large degree were developed by Frank Butler from Butler Beach and Dr. Puryear, who was the president of Florida Memorial College, who formed a realty company, and they developed the West Augustine community and laid it out and built homes, and actually I think held mortgages and stuff for people as they built their homes over there. Yeah, and the A.L. Lewis Insurance Company. Yeah. So those were the early businesses that had ties to both of those communities, and so they were growing simultaneously.
Yeah, ironically, my dad, we lived in West Augustine, and he grew up in West Augustine, but he graduated from Excelsior High School in Lincolnville. This shows you the connection there between, the West Augustine community and Lincolnville.
The stories and lessons and history are endless. So, Brenda, what's the first step? If someone wants to take the Black History Trail, do they get a manual? Is there a guide? Where do they go?
There's a couple of places locally you can pick up the guide, of course, at the Lincolnville Museum, Historic Cultural Center in Lincolnville on Martin Luther King Drive Avenue.
102 MLK Avenue.
Yep. And also at the Visitor Information Center near the parking garage and several of the other sites around town. you can contact the St. Johns County Cultural Council, and we'd be happy to send you some. We also have a website that includes a listing of the sites and their locations, as well as some of the history that's included in the trail. So those are probably the best ways to learn where these sites are and where you can go visit them.
What's that website?
What's the website?
The website is stjohnsculture.com/bh.
/BH.
Oh, okay.
Is there always something to do, whether it's a weekend or a weekday?
Oh, yes. There's some sites, the park sites are open, as long as the sun is up. And then I think Lincolnville is open every day.
We're open 7 days a week, and 10:30 to 4:30, and on Sundays and Mondays we're from 1 to 4:30.
And you have changing exhibits there.
We have change out exhibits from time to time. We do have a permanent exhibit. We have an exhibit that's being added to in September, which is called Women Who Made a Difference, that we're adding a new person to. And we're a little bit behind on our 100th anniversary because we had to push everything back, so that probably won't come out until October. And that's our 100th anniversary of the Excelsior Building exhibit. But we have, one floor that is basically exhibit space.
And you can go to the Lincolnville Museum and learn about the circumstances behind St. Augustine being the only place in Florida that Martin Luther King Jr. was ever arrested.
Absolutely, and a lot more. We have those arrest records from Dr. King that are there. We have a section of the Woolworth lunch counter where the St. Augustine Four participated as high school students in a sit-in and were arrested here locally, and it became a national story. There's so many stories in our local history that made the national and international news that people walk in, and this is we were talking about what's the response, I think you asked earlier, when people walk in and at the end of the tour they go, wow, I had no idea all of this happened here in St. Augustine. They are just amazed about the history, not just the civil rights history, but just in general, all the different kinds of stories that they learn about.
Regina, is the extremely regrettable, hurtful, unfortunate chapter in our history what happened at the Monson Motor Lodge? Is that story told at the Lincolnville Museum? And what is that story?
Absolutely. So people refer to it as the splash heard around the world because it hit international newspapers everywhere. So that was the day that the manager of the Monson Motor Lodge, thank you, Jimmy Brock, poured muriatic acid in the pool because black children were swimming in the pool. They were there as a part of a, swim-in protest. And so his way of getting them out of the pool was to pour muriatic acid, which they were fearful they couldn't swim. And they, were clinging to, some of the other older people who were in the pool that was there as a part of the protest as well. So that was a thing that actually moved the president of the United States. Here's an important story. Thank you. But moved the president of the United States at that time, Lyndon Johnson, to go to Congress that had been filibustering for 13 months about whether or not to pass the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and said, you got to do something about St. Augustine, of what's happening there. It's an embarrassment to us. It was on the headline of papers in Moscow and all over the world where we were trying to talk about, human rights for people, and here we're in the headlines of treating, black people in an indignant way. So it was messing with the narrative of the United States internationally as well. So that same day is it was a week after Dr. King was arrested at the same location. It was the exact same day that 16 rabbis were arrested at that location, participating in a prayer-in, and Jimmy Brock, who was the owner of that motel, had been deputized, and you can see him in the videos arresting these people and putting them under arrest. So it's the largest mass arrest of Jewish rabbis in the entire country before or after.
Mr. Jackson, your thoughts on the Black History Museum coming to St. Johns County?
13 counties vied for the site of the Black History Museum, which was going to be established by the state of Florida. And in the Republican administration, they really looked at all those 13 sites and the task force looked at them. And St. Augustine was selected as the site of Florida State Black History Museum. It's kind of an affirmation to the fact that Black history here in Florida emanated from St. Augustine. Black history pretty much started in Spanish Florida and in St. Augustine, and you have to come here to get the history. And a lot of the other 12 sites vying for the museum, they relied on relating to St. Augustine's Black history to fortify and justify their Black history. So
I could talk about this topic all day long. Thank you so much for joining me. I learned a lot today. I hope our listeners learned a lot today, and I hope this really energized everyone to visit the Black History Trail. I think it's something every man, woman, and child should do. Thank you, Thomas Jackson.
thank you for having me, and Viva Mose.
Viva Mose. Brenda Swan, it was a pleasure having you.
Thank you. Thanks for covering this.
And I thank you for your time and your interesting stories, Regina Gale.
Thank you.
And I hope everyone visits the Lincolnville Museum as well. in Fort
Absolutely.
Mose.
Yeah.
Thank you also to Beth Strauss over there in the corner being so quiet. But you're a big part. You're a big part of the Cultural Council and the Black History Trail. Thank you for being here. Thank you for tuning in to Good Morning St. Augustine. And remember, all of our programs can be downloaded as a podcast. Go to flaglerbroadcasting.com, click on podcast, and scroll down to Good Morning St. Augustine. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday in our beautiful, ancient, historic city.